President Vladimir Putin ordered a test of combat readiness for armed forces across Western Europe today. The test involves troops stationed along the Ukraine's northern border. Military forces were told to be ready to bomb unfamiliar testing grounds. The move comes as tensions continue to rise between the West and Russia over the situation in the Ukraine. Joining us today, former CIA analyst Lisa Ruth to discuss Russia's motives.
We will not be able to finish the job, regretfully.
By the nation's tax code don't stand a chance. Both Democrats and Republicans know tax reform is desperately needed, and so do business owners of all sizes. We'll speak to Newsmax finance editor Jeff Yastine about the new proposals and how they might impact your bottom line. And Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid says has stated that he won't consider any figure below $10.10 an hour for the minimum wage, despite fellow Democrats being unwilling or willing to negotiate. The minimum wage debate also creating challenges for Democratic senators seeking re-election in red states. How will business leaders plan as Congress plays politics with wages as well as taxes? America's Forum continues right now.
Purpose for comprehensive tax reform was to make America more competitive, not to make the government a big beneficiary of additional revenue.
The truth is we should have tackled tax reform years ago. It will be extremely difficult with the obstruction that we get here from the Republicans on virtually everything to do something that should have been done years ago.
Senator Mitch McConnell and Harry Reid right there. McConnell says the GOP's plan to reform the nation's tax code has no chance because of the White House and Reid in the Senate. Reid blames Republican obstruction. The proposal is expected to call for a cut in the top corporate income tax rate down to 25% from the current 35% and a reduction of the 7 individual tax brackets down into 2. Yesterday, Senator McConnell was quoted as saying the majority leader and the president have said they want $1 trillion in new revenue for the federal government as a condition for doing comprehensive tax reform, which we know we ought to do, so I have no hope of that happening this year. Now, under that plan, the tax rate for about 99% of Americans would be at most 25%. The one remaining 1% whose income is above $450,000 or so would also be subject to a 10% surcharge on certain types of income. That surcharge would affect salaried professionals like lawyers and accountants, and also would exclude those whose income comes from industries that produce goods like manufacturing and farming. Democrats are insisting any tax overhaul must again generate $1 trillion in new revenue. The plan is expected to be released sometime later today by Dave Camp of Michigan, the chairman of the important House Ways and Means Committee. Meanwhile, Mark Landrieu of Louisiana, Mary Landrieu, I should say, of Louisiana, and Mark Pryor of Arkansas, and Mark Warner of Virginia expressed their concerns over the minimum wage and that 10-10 figure. Warner was quoted as saying there ought to be an increase in the minimum wage. I think there's a valid debate about that, about the amount and timing. All 3 of those members of Congress are seeking re-election this November, and all those races are hyper competitive. Joining me right now to break down more of this tax proposal and what it could mean for the business world is Jeff Yastine. Jeff, it's good to have you with us.
Thanks, John.
So we'll delve into the world of politics a little bit for you, if you could give us that pleasure real quickly. So we're looking at this tax proposal now, and what does this mean for businesses as there's this talk of changing the way that businesses pay taxes? How do they prepare for this looking ahead, and how difficult is that?
I know for most business owners, more than anything, obviously the lower the rate, the better, but also simplicity. You know, when you're a business owner, you have so many different demands on your time. You have to have some way to be able to assess in a reasonable way, looking forward into the future, what you're going to do with your revenue. How are you going to apportion the money that's coming in from your business? And when you're doing that, obviously the more complex the tax code is, the tougher it is. Even if you're hiring out other people to do the work for you, obviously, as so many people, especially so many business owners do, that just adds one more expense, both in terms of money as well as in the time it takes to just work your way through the bureaucracy, the maze of rules and regulations on all this.
Now, there are 7 different tax brackets right now. They want to shrink this down into 2. We talked about the simplification aspect of it here. This would be a good thing. I think most businesses would see this no matter what the rate is.
I would guess, but the details are still, the proof is in the detail essentially. I think it just depends on whether you're a winner or a loser in the simplification of getting down to those two large lumps. And hopefully somewhere in the legislation they'll set up something so that if you happen to come into a larger set, that you are getting something else on the other side. And hopefully, if this goes through in some form that we recognize it here, that it will be phased in, which I believe it will, in a way that will give more of the business community a chance to really adjust to it.
And so that's the key here. Is there in any type of situation when you have a massive overhaul of the tax reform, it has to be difficult and complicated in ways like we saw when they had to deal with the changes coming from Obamacare as well?
That's true, and it seems like when I still do my taxes and try to take a pretty active role in taking care of them. And you see things about the Paperwork Reduction Act and all that, which are obviously things that you wonder, what joke was this? When you see those sorts of things. So anytime it seems like that Congress decides it's going to open up the Pandora's box of tax reform, you wonder just what's going to come out of that box when all is said and done. Are you going to wind up with something that's even more complex than what we started with? You just never know.
Yeah, and this also gives us an opportunity to talk about how much businesses actually pay attention to Washington. We saw this, we see this with the shutdown, for example, how politics can impact the financial world. But when we're talking about things like tax reform, is there a same level of attention paid to these plans here? Because as we talked about with David Patton, a lot of times this is just talk and there's no actual real plan there.
Well, I know for the larger Fortune 500 style companies, they're paying a great deal of attention to this because so many of them have billions parked in offshore banks that they don't want to repatriate because they know that there's going to be a gigantic tax hit. So, this has been the ongoing, dialogue between the business community and, successive presidential administrations as far as give us a lower tax rate so we can repatriate some of that money. The trade-off theoretically is that as that money comes in, there'll be hopefully more investment in this country that would then create more jobs. But as far as what's fair and how it all works out, obviously that's something more for the politicians to
Now,
decide.
as this news was breaking today, did you notice any movement in the markets as a result of it?
The main thing, the markets are up today. But whether it's somehow related to what's being discussed in Washington, perhaps, maybe some anticipation that if there is some sort of a way through the maze, a less complicated maze, one that puts more money in the pockets of shareholders and for corporate treasuries, perhaps. But the markets were moving up well in advance of this for the last number of weeks, so hard to say.
And so what would happen, let's say, and we'll focus specifically on the idea of a corporate income tax being lowered. It's the highest in this country right now. Would it have a different impact in different sectors of the economy? Some businesses are able to do more offshore, and we see that when they, a company like GE a few years ago, which paid zero corporate tax,
right,
effective tax. Would this really have an impact, or would we just see more reshuffling of these corporations moving to different places, perhaps, to utilize the tax code, which is lower in other places?
I think it just depends on the sector and the company and how advanced it is. Some companies are very advanced in how they work their funds overseas. They have, if they're a company that uses a lot of natural resources, they have hedging operations. So they're able to hedge their prices. They're able to do all sorts of things overseas and have these relationships with offshore banks to do that. Other companies are less sophisticated, either deliberately or just because they let that part of their business go. They don't think it's important. It's hard to say. It's so complicated.
Yeah, as we look at this, because there were special provisions in there, we talked about things like these manufacturers not facing the same surcharge as certain professionals like lawyers would. So that's interesting stuff there. Jeff, thanks so much for sticking around with us. We'll have you back for another segment. We're going to talk about the minimum wage also and how business owners are looking at that debate, which is happening in Washington as well. And of course, we want everybody to weigh in at home. We want to hear from you. You can find us on social media. What do you think about these new tax proposals? And if you're a business owner in particular, how do you plan ahead when it seems like there's so much uncertainty coming from Washington? You can find me on Twitter at @JohnB_Newsmax, or any of us here at the program at Newsmax TV, #America's Forum. or find us on email, connect@newsmaxtv.com, or on Facebook, facebook.com/NewsmaxTV. When we come right back, we'll have more with Jeff here and the latest developments on the minimum wage debate when America's Forum returns.